Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative of Cleveland, welcome and thank you for joining us. Before we begin, we'd like to share a bit about the CTSC. The Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative, or CTSC, of Cleveland is a collaborative among Case Western Reserve University and its affiliated hospital systems, the Cleveland Clinic, Metro Health, University Hospitals, and the Louis Stokes Veterans Administration Medical Center. We aspire to be a catalyst for high-quality clinical and translational research, both locally and nationally, by changing the culture and environment of biomedical research, sharing resources and expertise, and streamlining the research process to move translational research from bench to bedside into the community. Every Thursday in February, we're investing 1 hour to learn about a current Black history maker. Today, we celebrate and meet Joel Bervell. Joel is a Ghanaian American medical student and science communicator. On social media, he is better known as the medical mythbuster for creating viral medical content that is at the forefront of conversations about racial disparities in healthcare, the hidden history of medicine, and overlooked biases in the healthcare industry. After entering medical school, Joel became a highly respected TikTok and Instagram creator with over 760,000 combined followers and 120 million plus views. His videos break down complex topics about how healthcare still fails to serve marginalized groups. A gifted educator and engaging speaker, Joel has been sought after to share his unique and inspiring perspective with groups like Meta, Google, TikTok, the Clinton Foundation, General Electric, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and on behalf of the Congressional Black Congress and others. Joel has been featured on Good Morning America, Business Insider, NPR, Yahoo News, WebMD, and has advised organizations like TikTok on efforts to increase diversity and inclusion. Beyond his social media channels, the Medical Mythbuster contributes his expertise to various organizations to help recognize how digital media can be used to bridge communication between underrepresented groups and brands. He serves on councils including the White House Office of Public Engagement's Healthcare Leaders in Social Media, the Council for Social Responsible Media, and the World Health Organization's Operation Fides. He has collaborated with brands including Neutrogena, Google, Samsung, Listerine, Gushers, and the American Medical Association. Joel's work has earned him the honor of being named a Smithsonian Channel Cycle Breaker, Scientific American Revolutionary, 2022 National Minority Quality Forum 40 Under 40 Leader in Minority Health, and the 2022 recipient of the American Medical Student Association's Racial Justice and Medicine Award. Mashable called him your next must-follow creator. Joel, welcome. And now the floor is yours to share a bit about all of the amazing things that you have done today, and it just keeps on getting better.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. And I have to say, that's the first time I've had the bio read out loud before. So thank you for going through that. It was interesting hearing it out loud for the first time. But I'm so excited to be here today and to talk a little bit about my story and also why I'm using social media to talk about health inequities and disparities and trying to change narratives that have been the same for a long time. This is going to be a great conversation because it's going to be just that, a conversation. I'll share some slides in the beginning, but then I think we have some questions. So it'll be a kind of a guided conversation between myself. But I definitely want this to be open. I want this to be an opportunity for people to ask questions, to collaborate in different ways. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly. I have some slides that we'll go through. Awesome. Can everyone see that all right? I'm seeing nods. Perfect. So, as was mentioned, my name is Joel Bervell. I'm a Ghanaian American medical student right now, going to my fourth year of medical school, but I'm currently doing a research year in orthopedic surgery at Johns Hopkins. And my journey in medicine, I think we'll get into that a little bit later, but really, I just want to highlight some things that I'm doing right now on social media in terms of using social media to discuss narratives that have been overlooked for a long time, discuss conversations that affect people every single day, especially Black and Brown populations, but often don't get the light in the media or in the news that they should be getting. So right now I use mainly TikTok and Instagram. I've created over 600 videos over the past 3 years on a wide range of topics that include health equity, that include patient advocacy, but also stretching into things like race as a social construct or political narratives that are going on in the United States right now that impact medicine and the way that people receive care. And for me, the things that always get me the most excited is the comments that I receive from people. We'll go through some of those a little bit later. But first, I don't know if people have seen my videos, so I want to just give an example of the types of videos that I'm creating. So this first one I'm about to play is one of my storytime videos, and they're videos where I just talk about my own experiences going through medical school and finding out about biases that exist. So here's one of them. Yeah, for sure. It's absolutely insane how darker skin is often not shown as a pathology. They'll only use one standard color. Just to give one example of that, I'm a medical student right now. I remember in my first year, we were talking about cyanosis, which is when the skin goes blue. There's a ton of different reasons why it can happen. But I remember thinking to myself, well, my skin's not going to be blue if I'm cyanotic. So how do you look at it for Black patients? And then I had this internal debate of if I ask the professor this question or do I look like that person that's just trying to talk about skin color because I'm Black, but I decided to ask the question. And the professor had a great response. He said, look at your nail beds, right? You can tell if it's cyanotic there. Look at your eyes. You can use mucous membranes, different parts of the body too. And afterwards, some of my classmates came up to me and said, wow, Joel, thanks for asking that question. We never would have even thought about that or thought about the different ways to think about it. I just kept thinking to myself, if I hadn't asked that question, would anyone have ever learned that? So that's one of the videos. And another one that's more about the education pieces that I do. I have a whole series called Racial Bias in Medicine, where I dive into these topics in 30 to 60-second videos about equations or race-based medicine that still exists, racial inequities that a lot of people don't know about. So here's one about the GFR equation, which thankfully now has come a lot more to light, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But when I made this first video in 2020, the equation still existed, hadn't really been talked about as much. It was still in the process of being revised. In medicine, there's an equation that treats Black people's kidneys different than all other races. The equation is called the glomerular filtration rate, GFR, and for a long time it included race. The lower your GFR is, the worse your kidney's functioning. The higher it is, the better it works. A low GFR is what qualifies you for a kidney transplant. But for Black patients, and only Black patients, the GFR number had a race adjustment that increased the GFR number for all Black patients. Because higher GFR numbers indicate better kidney functioning, the race adjustment could have been overestimating GFR, leading to Black patients to miss care and get less treatment. One study estimated that without the race correction, 3.3 million more Black Americans would have had a higher level of kidney disease. In 2020, the National Kidney Foundation and American Society of Nephrology convened a task force to look at this equation. And in 2021, the task force announced a new race-free calculation for GFR. Now it's up to laboratories to get the new equation into use. So what you see from that video is it's super simple, 60 seconds, but you learn so much right there. If you've never heard about the GFR equation, you now don't know what it is. You know what's been happening, you know where we're going, and you know what the next steps are. Yeah, for sure. And when I post videos like that, they thankfully reach audiences that it never would have connected to. But unfortunately, things like the GFR are just the tip of the iceberg. I've talked about the vaginal birth after cesarean, which is another equation that exists. And now, thankfully, once again, it's been changed since 2020. But unfortunately, it made it more difficult for Black and Hispanic individuals to get a vaginal birth after having had a C-section compared to white patients specifically. There were, even in the NFL, there's been equations that have been racially based that have been used for this concept called race norming, which made it more difficult for Black patients to receive compensation because they had to show worse outcomes from playing football. And then even with heart failure, there are some racial corrections as well. And thankfully, articles have begun picking up on this, talking about it, but a lot of these things are still locked behind paywalls on places that the general patient can't access, whether it's PubMed or even things like Google Scholar, which, while can be a little bit accessible, are hard to actually navigate and read through. And so that's why social media is so important, to use things like Twitter or Instagram or TikTok to break down these conversations. One of the big things that I think we'll talk about later is pulse oximeters and kind of what's happening there, because I think it's one of the best examples to see how talking about these issues can actually lead to change over time. Or even like Google AI Health, where they were about to release an app that was able to basically use AI to take a picture of a skin condition on your skin and diagnose you. But when you actually looked at the database that they're drawing from, less than 4% of all the images used a Fitzpatrick type 5 or type 6, which is darker skin tones. And so with AI, it only works as well as the inputs you give into it. And so even companies like Google are now re-looking at the things that they've been using for a long time to better understand how do our systems even play into medical biases that can exist and harm patients as opposed to helping them. But really, as I said in the beginning, what makes me so happy about these conversations is the comments and the conversations that go on inside the comments of these videos, from people saying things that, whether it's them agreeing that they have felt things like this, medical biases, individuals saying that they've been told that they don't feel pain as much because they're Latina, people still thinking that Black people have thicker skin compared to white people, even though that's a falsehood. These are literal, sometimes physicians or healthcare professionals that still believe this. Talking about how even in nursing school, often not shown conditions on darker skin tones. Talking about how once seeing the videos has allowed people to better be able to engage in these conversations, be able to talk with professors where they're learning about it, or sharing new information that maybe they didn't know about it before. And one of my favorite comments was this one on the right here. It said, "Your ABCDE of melanoma video saved my life. I had the mole removed from the bottom of my foot earlier this year." And what video they were referring to was a video about this type of melanoma called acral lentiginous melanoma. It doesn't appear on the skin like the typical melanoma does, but instead on the palms, on the soles of your feet, sometimes on your nail beds. And oftentimes it may not even look like a cancer to you. I made a video about it specifically because it's a little bit easier to see on darker skinned people, because it's one of the places that'll show up better. And someone reached out and said that they actually went and got their own mole that they'd had biopsied. For this particular patient, it actually came back to be precancerous. And so now she's ongoing on keeping it monitoring. So that's kind of the overview I just want to give before we kind of jump into the conversation, but really just want to highlight the broad overview of using social media as a driver to really empower patients to be able to better take control of their own health.
Wow. Thank you, Joel. So for the first question, and again, feel free to type your questions in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute, but what inspired you to pursue a career in medicine?
Yeah, so we have to go back. The joke I kind of make is my parents are both Ghanaian American, or sorry, not Ghanaian American, they're Ghanaian. But being from Ghana, when I was growing up, they said I could be one of three things: a doctor, a lawyer, and an engineer. And while it was kind of a joke, I think they really knew the value of healthcare, especially coming from a country like Ghana. My parents both grew up more in the village areas, and so medicine was key for them. And oftentimes they didn't have access to it. And so as a career, that was one of the only things they knew for me and my siblings to go into. But for me, it stuck early on, and I loved it. The idea that you could be helping people, that you kind of knowledge about your own body, you can teach other people knowledge about their own bodies too. But it wasn't really until high school. I did a summer internship at Seattle Children's Hospital, and it was absolutely incredible. I fell in love with the field of medicine, especially the doctors I was shadowing. The way they interacted with their pediatric patients was so incredible, so moving. And after that, I knew I wanted to go into the field of medicine for sure.
All right. So when and where did you first learn about racial disparities in healthcare?
I think I've always thought about disparities in healthcare from an early age. As I mentioned, my parents are from Ghana. When I was growing up, my grandma used to be my main caretaker while my parents were off at work trying to kind of live for my siblings and have a better life. And my grandma didn't speak any English at all, but she came here just to take care of my siblings and I. But finally, when my siblings and I were, I think I was around sixth grade, when I was old enough to be on my own, my grandma went back to Ghana. And within a year, she got diagnosed with malaria, ended up at the hospital, and passed away. But unfortunately, a lot of the situation that led up to that was totally preventable. When she got to the hospital, she was told that she had to bring her own IV tubing, that they didn't have it there, that she was supposed to actually have someone else with her to actually help guide her through it. And for me, even though it was in Ghana, it was my first experience understanding that racial disparities can exist, and healthcare disparities can exist as well, especially in a global context. And I think seeing that happen to my own grandma made me more passionate about wanting to go into medicine to prevent it from happening to people here in the United States. And even when I got to college, then I took tons of classes on global health, but then also classes on the healthcare system in the United States. And the more I learned about the healthcare system in the United States from kind of the more business side, the more shocked I got that we didn't talk about it more, especially when it comes to things like the fact that we in the United States pay more per capita per person for healthcare than any other developed nation, yet get less when we get less in return in terms of health outcomes. And hearing about all those things really shocked me. And then when you look at the breakdown racially, you always notice that it'd be Black patients in particular that get the worst outcomes. And so I was always asking myself, why is it like this? Why are we going? What is it that actually predisposes our system to unfortunately not take care of Black patients in the same way that they should be compared to other patients? And so I think it's been a whole bunch of things that leading over the years that has led me to want to dive deeper into these conversations, better understand not just what we see on face value, but the systems that cause these things to persist.
What influenced you to use social media to talk about racial disparities in healthcare?
hmm So I'm a Gen Z slash like millennial. So I call myself a zillennial. I'm right on the edge in between there. In my generation, we're constantly on the phone. I'm on my computer. I'm on my phone, literally 24/7, which is probably bad. I always get those messages that say you've been on your phone this amount of hours. Um, but I've also realized that I got a lot of my early education from online, from going on TikTok, by going on Instagram, by going on YouTube, and it allowed me to kind of enter into a world that I didn't necessarily know about, but then do more research later down the line. And so, really, it was 2020 during the pandemic where I was on my phone even more than usual than I am now. And I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw a story about a device called a pulse oximeter, which measures your blood oxygen saturation level, and essentially shows how much oxygen is in your body and how much oxygen is in your body. And the study showed that Black patients had a 3 times more likelihood of having inaccurate, overestimated oxygen saturation levels, meaning that if you came into the hospital and you put this pulse ox and you actually were hypoxic and had a low oxygen saturation, this device potentially could show that you were normal. And this pulse oximeter is used in every single hospital. And so if that device is showing it's normal, despite a patient saying that maybe they feel fine, they could potentially be sent home early, not knowing that they're missing or masking these other symptoms. And so after I saw that video, I was shocked. After I saw that story, I was shocked. And I was asking myself, I just finished my pulmonology unit. Why had I never seen anything like this online? So I went to TikTok, which I know sounds like a big jump for me. Like I said, I was on TikTok all the time. I went to TikTok and I was like, how can I take this information and put it here to educate people about this disparity that I didn't even know about, and I'm in medical school. I know if I'm in it, I'm learning about it, I should be keeping up to date on all the most recent literature that impacts patients the most. How many people don't know about this? So I made a 30 to I think it was a 30-second video at that time, because I was in Max, was a lot on TikTok. I posted it, and within 24 hours, I had 500,000 views, and there was doctors and nurses and physicians, PAs saying, wow, I never knew that this pulse oximeter that I use literally every single day in my practice may not be working as equally on all my patients. That was really the start of me wanting to post more content to say, what else is out there that maybe I'm not even learning in medical school right now, that people out in the field that are practicing may not know about, but can change the way that we practice care, or that we should be practicing care every single day for patients.
So along those same lines, thanks for using that example. In November 2022, an FDA panel examined evidence informed by research that pulse oximeters may be less accurate on individuals with darker skin pigmentation. What influence did your TikTok about pulse oximeters inaccuracy on melanated or darker skin tones have on this phenomenon?
Yeah, I know my TikTok was only one part of this whole conversation, and the reason I say that was because research had been about pulse oximeters not working equally for decades. There's literally a 1995 paper in the journal Chest that shows that pulse oximeters don't work equally. But I think what my TikTok did was it brought it into more the mainstream. Everyone was on TikTok at that time, especially during the COVID pandemic. People were at home, not necessarily being at work, right? And so you're at your computer, maybe you're in a meeting, you're scrolling through TikTok at the same time, and COVID's going on as well. So there's all this conversation. I think that video allowed people to piece together health disparities with an ongoing pandemic in the same moment, and how health disparities connects to that. I think a lot of people were having difficulty understanding when people were saying things like Black, Indigenous, Latinx people are more likely to die of COVID. People were having difficulty processing that. I think this video pointed out just one example of how that happens when we don't keep in mind Black patients. So definitely don't want to take credit for anything at all in that sense. But I think what my video was able to do was give people a language to talk about healthcare disparities in a way that they hadn't before, especially for a layperson. I think the concept to understand something like a pulse oximeter not working is pretty easy once you hear about it. But unfortunately, once again, I said this earlier, but a lot of the research gets locked behind paywalls. And if only physicians or healthcare professionals are seeing this, a patient can't take control of their own health. Just to give one quick example of why that's so important, I got a message on LinkedIn about 2 years ago now. And it was from a guy named Olaseni, and he had seen my TikTok video and actually saved it. A few days later, he ended up in the hospital, and he had COVID, and he was having shortness of breath, he was having fevers, he was having loss of taste and smell, all the classic symptoms. The doctors gave him a pulse oximeter and it read normally, but he kept saying, "Hey, I remember I saw this video online that means that maybe this doesn't, maybe even though it says I'm at 98% oxygen saturation, it may not be as accurate." And he fought his way to stay in the hospital. And he actually told me he showed the video to the doctor that he was working with my video. The doctor was like, "Okay, we'll keep you overnight just to see if you're really that worried." He ended up decompensating and crashing. And the doctor said it was a good thing he stayed that night because if he'd gone home, it's possible he wouldn't have made it. And stories like that show the importance of having information not just for healthcare professionals, but also for patients. And of course, accurate information, because if you get inaccurate information, then you go down the wrong path. But when you have accurate information or can show your doctor a video that you've seen online that's evidence-based and is new research, you have the potential to save your own life and advocate for yourself.
I love that. Self-advocacy. We do have a question in the chat from Mel Harris. Do you plan to teach once you're done with medical school or work at a teaching hospital? I remember being laughed at when I called for a dermatology appointment and asked for a Black doctor. I was told that all doctors could assist me and my daughter, and I was told that they were trained and well-versed in Black health.
Yeah, I love that question. One, I absolutely want to be at a teaching hospital. I love teaching and doing this work. I do a lot of mentoring and different programs like that. I'm in Baltimore right now at Johns Hopkins, and I'm loving kind of this mix of academic and clinical. And so I definitely want to be at a teaching hospital. And I think the importance too is to be in communities where you're serving the populations that look like you. I think one thing you're referencing is racial concordance. And there's been studies that show that when the race of the doctor and the patient is the same, there's an increase in adherence of trust, of medication adherence, a lot of different things. And the reasons why we don't completely know, there needs to be more research done on that. But I would venture to say it's partly because oftentimes you see someone who's maybe gone through similar experiences as you, especially when you're from the same community, literally physically the same community, you're better able to understand the resources that are around, where the nearest pharmacy is. Maybe if there's food deserts in some areas where you can where you can get better food to access or nutrition access, or hospitals that are near you, or be recommended a provider maybe that you don't find somewhere else. And so I just want to kind of highlight the importance of diversity in healthcare of all types, whether that's gender, race, religion, etc., because it really does increase that patient-physician relationship, increases trust, and can lead to better outcomes for the whole entire healthcare system.
Maddie McCarthy has some kudos for you. Thank you for your current series, Woke Black History, especially the use of woke, given the attacks on the use of that verbiage. It is very educational and engaging. So check that out on Joel's TikTok if you haven't already. Dr. McClure says, what are some recommendations for those who are interested in sharing health-related information through social media?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll say thank you so much for the kudos for the series I'm doing right now. For those who don't know, I'm doing a whole series this month where every single day I post a new video about someone from Black history, and I purposely called it Woke Black History because of the so many attacks that are happening in woke culture. When woke is actually a word that was created in the early 1950s, 1960s, with African American vernacular. And so it's rooted in, it has this deep history, and it meant an awareness of the racial injustice that was going on in the world. Yet today, it's taking this whole new meaning of being a negative. And so I really wanted to try and spin this to be something that's positive. Why not return woke back to its roots? And so that's kind of the history series I'm doing right now. And it's gonna be super exciting. I love doing it because it's fun for me to kind of dive into the history and also be able to kind of pare it down and share it with everyone. To the second question, recommendations for those interested in sharing health related info on social media. I know this might sound kind of snide, but I kind of just say just do it. Start that account, start that Instagram, that LinkedIn, or that whatever site you want to use or that you use already. I think the easiest way is to start by following people that have similar interests as you. When I started creating content on healthcare disparities, I actually wasn't following anyone who was doing that. And so at least not on TikTok or Instagram. I'd seen a lot of content on Twitter, and so I started following people there. So people like Dr. Oni Blackstock, who's done so much incredible work with health equity. But I realized that there was a missing gap between being able to translate this kind of academic knowledge in a video form. And so that's why I really started doing it. But I started by following people who knew more about it than me, who had been doing the work already, and then figuring out where are the gaps that we're not reaching at, what are the conversations that we're not having, and how can I use my knowledge of social media to do that. But if I hadn't just gotten started, made a video, started talking online, I never would have done it. And I actually do credit the COVID pandemic with that a lot because our classes were entirely online. And I know I would not have been able to do this if we had still been in person and having to go to clinic, having to see patients, etc. But I think that was one of the silver linings for the COVID pandemic was being able to have more time to sit and really digest and kind of dissect all this information that was out there and find new ways to put it and repackage it to people that hadn't had access to it before. So in Nike's words, just do it.
Liz Ruttenberg from
Thanks.
Hospitals. She says, you are creating extremely valuable content. Do you have any thoughts or plans to curate it and make it available in other formats?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I really want to do is create a curriculum, using my videos kind of as one of the starting points, but then listing out all the resources and the links that I use. It's actually really interesting. One of my friends last year during her obstetrics and gynecology rotation in medical school, she sent me a picture that my TikTok was in her reproductive biology unit, or reproductive justice unit, as kind of a syllabus suggested resources. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, oh my goodness, like this is awesome, but I need to find a better way to curate my videos so that it's easy for maybe someone that's not on TikTok or Instagram to access. And I have them on my website right now, but I really want to put it in a better way where it can be a starting point, but not an ending point. So I'm working on it right now. I'm hoping to have a huge curriculum come out in the next year where it really starts off these issues, talks about the timeline of things, where we're going, where we're hoping to go, the things that need to change, so that medical schools as well as non-medical professionals can access this information.
Looking forward to seeing that come to fruition, Joel. We have another comment from Anila Cheeky. There's so much work to be done to earn the trust of people of color. I appreciate that University Hospitals, that's one of our local health systems, has an awareness that we need to have UH caregivers to be as diverse as the population we serve. When that doesn't happen, I believe people's lives are in danger. I commend your courage and insight.
Thank you so much, and absolutely agree. Yeah, when you have communities that look and come from the areas that you're from as well, you're better able to serve those communities because you understand their true needs. It's kind of that the grassroots type of idea, and being able to connect with patients where they're at, where they're going to be afterwards. I think too often in medical school, and this is changing thankfully, but we think about healthcare starting in the hospital and ending in the hospital, where it starts literally lifelong, from all the things you do growing up, to the community that you live in, to the food that you have access to your family, the pressures you have, to the stress that may be in your environment, to then the hospital stay, and whatever comes afterwards as well. And so other things I think a lot about too are, and even before I actually entered into medical school, I'd been debating whether I wanted to get in something like an MD, MBA. I'm seeing the business side is less necessary now, but one of the reasons why was because I think a lot about the financial burdens too, that healthcare has on individuals. There was just a really interesting story that came out on NPR and also the New York Times that talked about specific hospital systems in Seattle, Washington, that unfortunately were preying on individuals who didn't have the funds to be able to pay for their healthcare. And what ended up happening was these people went home and weren't able to even buy their medications. So they had to split and ration the medications they were supposed to be taking. They weren't able to buy groceries, and so they were eating fast food instead of healthy foods. And basically, all the advice the doctor had given them was unable to be followed because of these financial burdens. And so I always like to also look at these intersections between different fields, whether that's finances and business in medicine or tech in medicine, to understand the intersections of how can we reach patients where they're at and make sure that medicine is working to the best of our ability.
So building off of that, let's talk a little bit about your work and its relationship with translational science translation. So the process of translation involves turning observations in the lab, clinic, and community into interventions that improve the health of individuals and the public, from diagnostics and therapeutics to medical procedures and behavioral changes. Why do you think your method of science communication is effective when you think about it in its relationship to translation?
Yeah, I think what makes my method of using social media so effective is one, people haven't seen kind of this content, healthcare disparities content repackaged in this way. And so right now, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to see it, people have short attention spans. And people want to get information about both the facts and also real world experience. I think being a medical student, walking through this, as you saw, I showed one video where I had a story time where I'm able to share my own experiences, although individual, but then take those experiences and combine them with the studies that are out there to bring them together. And I think that's what translational science needs to do, right? It brings the individual observations, as you were saying, plus these observations that are seen more nationally or through large databases that have large n sizes of research, and bring those two things together in order to make a strong argument of why we need to make changes. And so I think that whole idea of using a new medium to share individual experiences to then connect it to these studies that have been going on for so long that prove these things is what makes it so powerful. Because I think a lot of people haven't seen that very often. Um, I think the other thing that TikTok has allowed us to do is just the democratization of information. And while social media had done that originally when it was first coming out, even which is Facebook and MySpace and all these other sites, I think TikTok has done it in such an interesting way where when you're scrolling through the main feed, and for those that aren't on TikTok, when you scroll through the main feed, it sends you random videos that it thinks you'll like. But every so often, you'll get a video that maybe is a little bit outside of what you are used to, but potentially could still be useful for you. And I feel like that's what my videos always are. It's that kind of video that comes along that you're like, wait, Black people's kidneys aren't treated the same? Wait, what? And so then you stay, watch the 30 seconds, and you are like, let me learn more about this. So you go to my page, you go down this rabbit hole, understanding that there's all these things out there. And especially if you're a patient that has had some, unfortunately, negative experiences in the hospital system, you're more likely to tune into that and be able to figure out what videos help you advocate for yourself. So all that to say, I think it's a mix of the individual stories plus the kind of the using the institutional research that's out there already, plus the new medium of having this information come at you in a way that you're not expecting, but possibly may find it at the right time that you need.
Earlier, you shared a bit about how you have impacted patients' lives by providing information, and it really allows for them to build that case for self-advocacy. Patient involvement is a critical feature of all stages of translation as well. So what opportunities do you see within social media to help increase patient involvement or community outreach and engagement in all stages of research? And how can the research community use similar tools and strategies to disseminate their research findings if there are some kind of barriers? We're not allowed to use TikTok here, or we're not allowed to use this other social media, through our system. What recommendations would you have for that?
Yeah, I think one way is working with people who are starting to do this. I think there's more people that are using social media now to talk about these types of studies that are out there. So, like myself, I actually get a lot of people who will send me their most up to date research and say, "Hey, I'm actually just publishing this study. If you like it, like feel free to make a video on it. It might be something interesting." And I kind of love that because one, it's an amazing way to get necessary research that could be life changing for patients, but also change physicians' practices out there, right? And so even if this you as a hospital system or as an individual isn't allowed to create content, you can always have other people create content on your behalf, and that happens actually quite often. I think two, being able to vet information is really interesting, really important too. And so even if you're not creating content, looking at the content that's online or bringing together consortiums of people that are dedicated to going online to make sure that there's accurate information out there. I think I've talked a lot about how it's important to have information out there, but it's also important to realize that there's a lot of wrong information out there online that can negatively impact how people seek care or the things that they desire in the hospital system. And unfortunately, those inaccuracies are heightened when it comes to language differences. I can't remember the exact numbers now, but when you look at content moderation online, almost, I think it's about 90% of it is done in English. So that means anything that's in a different language is often not moderated, is not looked at, especially when it comes to healthcare information. And so healthcare information can often be incorrect when it comes to different languages. And so one of the things I like to do is think about how can I actually work with even companies like Google or like TikTok, like Instagram, to make sure that the information that's out there is accurate. And that's something as well that I think hospital systems can even do in a partnership. And I think some places are doing that now.
I see a raised hand. Thank you, Joel, from Maddie McCarthy.
Oh, I was just going to ask, like, given that how besides working to make sure that the information is accurate, how do you combat online misinformation? Because the people are just like you, they're very good at putting stuff online and making it engaging. So how would you say to combat online misinformation?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think during the COVID pandemic, it really became something that I had to be like really understand how to do. I think it's about not necessarily telling people, "Hey, you're totally wrong," but walking them through where the gaps in what they're saying is incorrect and trying to fix that. And so on TikTok, there's actually the World Health Organization. What I do with them through Operation Fighties, it was a consortium of physicians and nurses and PAs that were kind of sought after by the WHO in order to combat disinformation and misinformation on TikTok. And so they put together this group. We would actually look and find different pieces of information that were incorrect. We share them with each other and we talk about maybe we all make a video on this kind of specific topic, maybe not attacking this person, but just on this topic to get more positive information out there. Another thing that's incredible now about social media is you can stitch videos or remix videos, meaning if someone posts something that's inaccurate, you can kind of take the first 10 seconds of it or 5 seconds of it and then respond to it directly as if you're having a conversation there. I love that approach because it allows you to really point by point go through and say, actually, this is wrong. Here's why. Actually, the studies research doesn't show this. Here's why, and walk through. And I forget her name, but there was a pathology researcher on TikTok where she would literally take the videos and break it down. So they'd say one point, and then she'd jump in and be like, "That was wrong because X, Y, Z." I think it was an incredible way to really be able to break down and start to kind of push back against misinformation without necessarily calling people wrong, right? But instead filling in the gaps that there needs to be.
We have a question from Mel Harris. Mel, you can take yourself off mute.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm sure most of the people in here know that Friday is Wear Red in recognition of heart and cardiovascular health. Unfortunately, my family's been impacted by heart disease and in different ways. And so specifically for my mother, so what disparities should I be looking for when it comes to heart disease? And then I remember I have a Black PCP and him recommending that I take a particular test. So it was blood as well as a questionnaire to see my risk for heart disease. And I've talked to other people and most of their PCPs are not doing that for them. And so he gave me a plan after those results came back. And so one of the questions I have is, have you seen that I've seen that there are recommendations for Black men with early prostate screening. Do you think that there will be more race or gender recommendations for screenings and testing as medicine progresses? And do you think we'll see more women and people of color in the trials, medical trials?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I think it's an interesting one because one points out that we still use race in some aspects, right, in order to understand, should we do pre-screening, etc. And the phrase I always like to use is that's the reason why we use those types of screening methods is not because of race, but racism. In medicine, we know race is a social construct, meaning that when you look at biology, you can't say that, you can't actually look at someone's genes and say from one specific gene marker that this person is Black, this person is white, this person is Asian, etc. You can talk about ancestry, but you can't talk about race. And so race is kind of this inaccurate marker that we still use in order to provide different recommendations for things. Yet the reason why we do it is because when we look at history, for a long time, there's been specific policies that have made it more difficult for Black patients to receive care or to live in areas that have better access to clean air, for example. And so when it comes to all these types of things, that's why race is still included in kind of recommendations and risk stratification, et cetera. But there needs to be that nuance of understanding why it's used, when it's used, and if it should be used, which I think often we don't have. With that said, I think that as we go forward, the hope that a lot of people in health equity leaders have been talking about is getting more to precision medicine. So even beyond race, really understanding an individual's genetic makeup, what they may be predisposed to, and focusing more on things like family history, right? And so you've talked a lot about your family history, focusing more on that as opposed to focusing on where someone's race is, because family history is a much better indicator of kind of the final outcomes as opposed to race. When things comes to things like prostate screening as well, I think like looking at things like family history, but also then better understand. I think the reason why they're trying to move it earlier is because we're seeing all these increases in high public profile deaths from things like prostate cancer. We think about Chadwick Boseman, who passed away, and other kind of icons in the Black community. And so I think as we go forward, we're still going to see race used, but I think there's going to be more nuance in how it's used and more understanding that race as alone should not be used, but should be used in conjunction with ancestry, with precision medicine, with areas where people live, all these other types of things. Same thing with women as well. I think women were left for a long time until late 90s out of clinical trials for fear of things like pregnancy complications. But when you look at trials now, we need to have more equity because unfortunately, we know that, for example, women don't present the same way when it comes to heart attacks, right? It may be slightly different, and that they're less likely to be believed when it comes to things like that as well. And so I think we're really trying to make sure that there's a balance and nuance between understanding that it's racism, not race, and then also understanding these kind of gender differences as well, and wanting to reach into them, but not overshoot and do more harm than good. Hopefully that answers your question. I know it's a nuanced question. It's something that's still trying to be kind of understood out there. How do we best approach this?
Thank you, Mel. We have a question from John Killings in Cleveland Clinic's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. John?
Hi, Joel. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Before I ask my question, I wanted to give you a tidbit. I sent you a DM. You talked about curriculum building. I have a friend that's in Columbus that does social justice work, and his family is mostly doctors. So I linked you to him so you can see how he can maybe connect the dots and get the curriculum stuff done that you were looking to do. So I wanted to give you that. But also I wanted to ask, what advice would you give young folks of color wanting to go into medicine, right? You're a young man, and we know how the stereotype and the stigma is, particularly in the US, right, about going into medicine and having that access. So what advice, what things do you think would need to happen to do that?
Yeah, I love that question. I always tell kids to try and get as much experience as you can in the healthcare field. And that doesn't necessarily mean being in a hospital or even shadowing a doctor. It can be finding organizations around you that are about STEM education. It can be joining things like the math team or the biology club after school and really diving into it, because healthcare is a holistic field. It's not just about the sciences or the tech or engineering aspect of it, but there's so much more. So being well-rounded, getting all the experiences you can, joining after-school programs or finding different opportunities is the best way forward. I mentioned earlier about the first kind of real-world medical experience I had, which was at Seattle Children's Hospital. That was after my sophomore year of high school, and that was through a program that I applied to. And so I always tell kids, look for programs, be on the lookout, be asking questions, meet people that you want to be your mentors, and don't be afraid to ask for help if you want to get there as well.
Do you have any other questions for Joel? And maybe Joel, do you have any questions for the people who are on the call? It looks like we have a lot from our local healthcare institutions, researchers. Any final takeaways, things that you, marching orders, if you will?
I guess one of the things I'll say is I think medicine is changing fast, and being able to better understand how do we make sure that patients are along the ride and not left out of the ride is going to be really important. In this age of social media, my my go-to is just to say that I think every physician, every medical provider should be on social media in some aspect, because I think we have knowledge that everyone should be able to have access to. That's why we go to medical school, to be able to talk about it. And a lot of physicians will sometimes ask me, what if I don't know what to post about? And my question to them is always, did you talk to something medical about with your patients today? They're like, yeah. I'm like, just take that conversation. Try and like write it out, take it to 30 seconds and post it on TikTok. Because you never know who like would need that kind of information in that moment. If you're talking to one patient, there could be millions of other people that need that information too. And of course, there's all like being very prudent about how you put that out there, because there's so many individuals factors that go into kind of care for patients. But understanding that there is information that most people don't have, as simple as things like how do the kidneys work, right? Or what's the benefits of exercise, or what is a stroke? You know, like all these types of things are things that people don't know about, yet hear about every single day. And so being able to break down pathology or biology or kind of medical changes that are happening in real time is really valuable for a lot of people. It's a gift, I think, in medicine to be able to be storytellers and translators of medicine.
Thank you so much, Joel, for kicking off our Black History Makers series, imparting so much wisdom, as you are one of the visionaries, the lights. So we really look forward to following your career and taking your advice, implementing a lot of the recommendations you've given.
Amazing. And thank you so much. And if people want to reach out, my ads are super easy, just my name, @Joel Bervell.
Perfect. And it's also in the chat. So who's next? We have Dr. Randy Vince Jr. He is a doctor, urologist, the inaugural Minority Men's Health Director at University Hospital's Cutler Center for Men. That'll be next Thursday, February 9th from noon to 1, also on Zoom. And since you've already registered for this, you are registered for the entire series. We hope that you will join us and hear from these wonderful Black history makers. And what can you do today? Besides all of the recommendations from Joel, you can schedule a ready consultation at spark.case.edu. You can sign up to attend future programming and join our listserv, and review CTSC DEIA resources on our website. Thank you for joining us. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and should be on TikTok. You can also send us an email at ctsc-administrator@case.edu. And we hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.